We're going to talk about one editing trick that I use in pretty much every photo that I edit, certainly in a huge amount of them. It's something you can use in any editing program. It makes a huge difference. Let's just get into it. It's Tutorial Tuesday. Welcome back to Tutorial Tuesday, where each and every Tuesday we bring you a brand new, fresh photography tutorial. This week, of course, like I say, we're going to dive into some editing. Now, we're going to use Lightroom, but that's only because I've got a lot of my photos in Lightroom, so it's nice and easy to kind of dive in. But you can do this in Capture One, you can do it in Photoshop, you can do it in all kinds of editing software. And this is a trick that I use all the time to guide my viewer's eye, right? The way you look at your photo might be different to the way your viewer looks at your photo. But by editing it in a certain way, you can help guide your viewer to look at your photo in the way that you intended, and actually to focus on the parts of the photo that you want them to focus on, to actually draw them in through the photo, go onto the subject, and actually ultimately have your photo come across fully the way that you intend. Now, there's different ways that we can do this. There's different techniques that you can use. This photo, for example, in editing, I've really accentuated the darkness around the fire, and then actually boosted some of the exposure and just some warm tones around that fire with a radial gradient to really kind of make a warm glow coming from that. So that really becomes the focal point of the image. The actual raw image was much lighter than this. This photo, for example, I've used light to really try and draw the viewer's eye into the photo. That's a technique I'll use a lot, is actually to use light to really guide where I want the viewer's eye to go. That's what we're going to have a look at now. So let's look at this photo. This was taken on the Nikon Z8. It's just in a local wood to me. It's taken kind of looking down this forest path. We've got someone walking away in the distance as well, but we really want to draw the viewer's eye towards that kind of down that path, right? Towards the person walking away, really accentuate that. We can use light to do it. We can use a bit of color to do it. There's lots of different things we can do. Let's just start diving in. This is untouched. I've not edited this at all. So let's go ahead and first up, let's crop this. What I want to do is center up that kind of pathway. Let's go for something like that. I think that looks pretty good. Maybe like that. There we go. I think that immediately helps, right? Cropping your photo to the right kind of composition immediately makes a big difference to the way your viewer is going to experience that photo. This already feels like we're being pulled down that path more so. Next up, let's do some global edits. So this is affecting the photo as a whole. I might bring the highlights down a little bit just to soften some of these lighter areas on the ground and in the trees there. Let's bring the shadows up just a touch. I'm going to bring the clarity up as well. Not too much, but just a little bit. And I'm bringing the vibrance up, but the saturation down just a touch. We're going to leave the curve for now. We might come back to it. And I want to come down to the hue, saturation, luminance kind of levels here. We're going to bring the orange kind of down, the yellows down a bit, and the greens, that's going to make a big difference. Now, bringing the greens towards the yellow is going to make this probably feel a little bit more summery, hopefully. We'll see. We'll see how we get on. Blues, I'm going to bring over towards the sort of teal end of things. You know what I'm going to do? I'm going to come straight back up, and I'm actually going to warm up the whole photo. Let's bring that color temperature into the warmer levels here. Something like that. I think that looks pretty good. Let's experiment with this tint. Let's add a bit of magenta. Yeah, it's quite a green photo. What does something like that look like? I think that looks good. We're going to come back to it. We're probably going to edit some of these values again. Let's come down to the color grading tab here, where we're just going to add a little bit of orange into the midtones and the highlights, just to really sort of warm this up, and maybe a little bit of blue into the shadows. Yeah, pretty standard sort of stuff. You can always click this little eye icon here, click and hold to see what it looked like without. It's a pretty subtle difference. Let's leave it like that for now. I like that. And let's see how we go. And then in the calibration, I'm going to bring the red primary over to the orange a little bit, the blue primary over to the blue. And if we press the / key on our keyboard, you can see this is where we started and this is where we've gotten to. So a much warmer image. Maybe it feels a bit more summery, but we're certainly not done. That's just kind of a global edit to get us started, to get the photo moving in the right direction. We don't have to do it like this at all. We don't have to have it warm. We could actually reduce this back down to sort of a cooler temperature. That looks pretty good as well. It's just a different kind of feel, right? It's just whether you want this warm, summery feeling forest or more of a dark, green forest. That's entirely up to you. Now we're going to get into the interesting part. This is where we use masks to really draw our viewer's eye to where we want it to be. And where we want it to be is coming down this path. So the first thing I'm going to do is get a linear gradient. I'm going to bring this up from the bottom, and I'm actually going to just reduce the exposure. No need to have this kind of foreground area very bright. We don't want our viewer's eye to be focused on that. And generally speaking, your eye will look to ignore darker parts of the image and look to find brighter areas, right? So by just darkening that foreground part, we immediately start drawing our viewer's eye further into the photo. So let's go ahead and create another mask. Let's go for a radial gradient this time. This time I'm going to draw it just over kind of the center here, down this path. I'm going to boost the exposure. I'm going to bring that up. That's nice and bright. And I'm going to bring the dehaze down a little bit because I want to create almost a misty kind of light feel to this. I want it to feel like there's sunlight coming in there, and it really is. That's where the light is, because that's going to bring the viewer's eye. I'm actually going to warm it up a little bit as well. I think that looks pretty good. Let's go ahead and make another mask, another radial gradient. I'm going to do a little bit bigger this time. And again, position it right where we had it last time. So right kind of over where the path is. We're going to click invert. Now that's going to affect everything but that circle. We've got it nice and feathered as well. And I'm going to bring this exposure down a touch. So not too crazy, but you can see this is starting to darken these parts of the forest. We're starting to get a real kind of dark feel and then pushing us through to the lighter area up ahead. Let's go ahead and do one more. Let's do a linear gradient and let's just bring that in from the top left. Now it doesn't have to be the top left, it could be the top right, but what I want to do with this one is really make a sunlight kind of feel. So the actual light coming in, we're going to bring the exposure up a little bit. We're going to bring the dehaze down a little bit. And I'm actually going to warm that up even a little bit more. But this is lightening the foreground here again, which I don't necessarily want to do. So I can come up here to where we've got mask 4 and click subtract. I'm going to click brush. And I can actually just use the scroll wheel to make it bigger or smaller. And I can just get rid of some of that, paint that out a little bit. We can press O to see where the mask is. So if you want to make sure you're getting rid of some of it there, we can do that. I don't want to get rid of all of it here because some bits of light I want to kind of come through. I think that looks pretty good. I'm actually really happy with that. Let's come back to the overall edit, which I said we might come back to. We can always bring the saturation down a little bit if we want to. We could always make this a little bit cooler if we want to as well. Maybe let's just bring that back up and let's just bring the contrast up a little bit as well. I feel like we've lost a bit of contrast in this time, and maybe the highlights down just a touch. Now, if we come down to the hue, saturation, luminance, and the color grading, let's see if we still like those. Let's click the eye icon here and then hold it and then release to actually see what we've done. I think I like the color grading. I think I like it. Let's go HSL to the hue, saturation, luminance. Let's turn that off, turn that back on. That's an interesting one. I could probably take it or leave it actually. We could make it very sort of color graded like that. We could really lean into the green. I think I'm going to go for something like this. Let's just come into the luminance. Let's bring the greens down a little bit, the yellows down. Let's bring the saturation down a touch as well. Okay, I'm pretty happy with how this looks. Let's press backslash to see how it looked before. That's where we started. That's where we've got to. You can really see when I do that, the difference in the lighting, right? Here we've really pulled the viewer into the photo. You can also press Y to see a side by side of the before and after. We've really pulled the viewer into the photo there, which I think that's before, that's after. I think that's done exactly what I wanted it to do. I've done a very similar thing with this photo here, where I've tried to pull the viewer into the photo to really see kind of what I was seeing at the time, which is down this path. It's actually just a different area within this same kind of wooded area. But I use this trick all the time, trying to just lighten the area of the photo that I want the viewer to actually focus on and darken some of the other areas. You don't want to go too overboard because otherwise you are essentially just creating a very strong vignette, which sometimes is great, but other times you don't necessarily want to do that. But for a lot of things, using some light and actually using exposure, dehaze, maybe contrast, you can really pull your viewer's eye to where you want it to be in the photo. So that's it, a pretty quick tip this week, but something I use all the time. Let me know if this is something you already use, and if you have any other tips for how to use it. I'd love to hear about them down in the comments, especially because I use this all the time. Anything that I've not thought of already, super interesting to me. Otherwise, don't forget to like and subscribe. I will, of course, see you next time. But until then, as always, thanks for watching.